right, so let's get started. Thank you guys for coming out to the very first Houston React Native Meetup. Thank you, Dan, for allowing us to use this space. Before we get started, I just want to do a quick introduction about myself and what I'm hoping for this meetup. And I think I talked about a little bit of this earlier, but my name is Karen Aurora. I am a UI developer at FuelQuest over in Greenway Plaza. At work, I use Angular to build our applications, but for my own personal applications, I build in React and React Native. Right now, I'm working on my own application where I use React Native, and that was really one of the reasons I decided to start this group. I was hoping to help develop a React Native community here in Houston. I've gone to React meetups, JavaScript meetups, iOS, just Java, Android meetups, and I haven't really met that many React Native people. And I'm not sure if that's because they don't exist or there's just no community for them to kind of come in and, latch onto. So I'm hoping to start that, something where we can bring them together, we can all learn together, and not only that, I really want to create a community where we can talk about our ideas like we were earlier just now. We can give each other real feedback, we can hold pitch days, and we can be brutally honest and tell each other, this is great, this isn't, maybe think about this. I think that'll be really helpful to all of us. So, that's my little spiel. Today we're going to discuss React Native and Firebase, and it really is easier than you think. Hey, come on in. So if you read the description, you saw my goals for today were set up a React application, add a Redux, connect to Firebase, do Firebase Authentication, Firebase Data Store, and Firebase Cloud Functions. And as I was creating this slide deck, I realized that's kind of a lot. We're going to be moving pretty fast. So I decided, let's take most of that out and let's just do what's important to get started. So now we're going to just set up a React Native application. We're going to connect to Firebase, and we're going to do some Firebase authentication. We're not going to set up Redux. I think that we can maybe push these into a future meetup where we do a part 2. So first and foremost, why choose React Native? If you're a React developer, I think this is and you want to build in mobile, I think this is a very easy transition to make. Short of the actual work with Xcode and with the Android SDK, it's really all just building in React. It looks the same, that you have the same logic, you still have JSX, it's still component based, and you get to essentially build an environment that you're used to building in. So beyond that, you can build native apps that are actually native. These aren't just applications where it's really a web app and you just put an icon on an iOS device or on an Android device and it opens up a web browser. These are truly native applications that make use of the device APIs. You can access the cameras, you can access the magnets, anything in there, you can access it. This is a truly native device. You don't need to waste time compiling. So when you type something in, you press save, it's going to automatically refresh the simulator and you're going to have that ready to go. On top of that, you have the ability to use native code. So if you're using iOS, you have Swift and Objective-C. If you're using Android, you have Java. And you can actually pull in libraries that are already built for those applications or CocoaPods, pod files, and you can plug them right into your application. So you don't lose any of the abilities that you would have building a truly native application. And then, of course, the best benefit is you develop once and you ship everywhere. You don't need 2 teams to do this anymore. You just need some JavaScript guys that can go in and build it. And whatever they build works on all devices. And then we have a few companies that are using it. Of course, we have the Facebook set of companies. We also have FA, Skype, Pinterest, Tesla, Uber Eats is using it. Airbnb was using it for a while. They recently switched. But the reason they originally selected React Native was because it was cheaper. They didn't need 2 different development teams. There was a much shorter educational curve, and they were able to get it up and running immediately. So if those are constraints that you're facing, that most people are facing, time, technologies, just financial constraints, React Native is a really great way to go to get started. So let's jump right in. All right, so for this project, we're going to be doing some development with iOS. I'm not going to attack the Android side just because it'll take too much time. Maybe in a future meetup we can do that. So with iOS, you're going to need Xcode, which is the iOS IDE. With Xcode, you can build mobile applications, you can build Mac applications, TV, OS applications, and if any of you have ever used Xcode, you'll know it's a little bit of a monster, but it's absolutely necessary to build any type of iOS or any type of Apple application. So I'm not going to show us how to download that. I'll just tell you guys right now. If you have a Mac and you need a Mac to do this, you go into the App Store, you download Xcode.
So I don't think I understand. Like, what languages do you use with React Native?
JavaScript.
JavaScript.
Yes.
But do you still need the Xcode?
Yes. So you're building, at the end of the day, you're still building an iOS and an Android application, and it's going to compile in Xcode. In order to launch anything to the App Store, it has to go through Xcode. You need an Apple developer account, and you need some certain Apple certifications. An Apple development account costs $99, and with that, you get access to a whole bunch of features and tools, but it's impossible to deploy an application without having that, unfortunately. Right.
Yeah, so the Xcode just to the store.
Not exactly. There will be. Sorry.
Or you make some changes in the Xcode.
There will be some.
Sounds like Xamarin.
What's that?
It sounds a little like Xamarin to me.
I'm not familiar with that.
It's
Dirty word.
Yeah, so you will need Xcode, especially when it comes to linking libraries and that sort of thing. And we're not doing anything specific to that today. I can add that into a future presentation. But Xcode is actually it's a complete must. You can't develop for any Apple product without Xcode, unfortunately. It's one of the ways that Apple holds you hostage, and you can't download Xcode unless you have a Mac. But again, if you're developing for an Android device, you can do that on any device. Okay, so in addition to Xcode, with Xcode, if you are going to download it and you don't have it already, download it in the morning before you go to work. It's going to take 3-4 hours. It's a giant file, and it's slow, and it's buggy. So download it before you go to work, come home, and then fight it till you get it working. Unfortunately, it's just the way it is. Okay, you need Homebrew. You need this to install Node, and you need this to install Watchman. And then you need the React Native CLI. Watchman is going to watch your files. When you press save, it's going to reload, or it's going to register that it's been saved, and it's going to reload the simulator. And then the React Native CLI will help you get your application up and running, and it'll help you deploy the simulators as well.
So is the React Native CLI? Oh, that's an NPM package. Okay.
Yeah. So I did cheat. Instead of live coding in front of you guys, I recorded everything that I've done so that we won't have to deal with any errors or any load times. So first thing you want to do, we're going to skip ahead of downloading Xcode. We're going to skip ahead of downloading Homebrew and downloading Node. I'm expecting if you're developing in JavaScript, you already have that in place, minus maybe the Xcode. So in order to download Watchman, you want to do brew install Watchman. It takes 2 seconds to download, and then you want to do npm install -g React Native CLI. This is going to take about 30 seconds, but once that's done, you have access to the entire React Native environment. So once you do that, you just cd into the location you want to develop. I created a folder called HTX React Native Meetup, and I'm going to initialize a project. So I type React Native in it, and you put the name of the project. I named this one RN Firebase for React Native Firebase. For the demonstration, you can name it whatever you want, but React Native in it, name a project. And then this should take maybe 2-3 minutes to download. Once it's done, you have a React Native project. So this is the file structure as soon as you get in. As you can see at the top, you do have an Android file, you have an iOS file, then you have Node modules, and everything else below looks like something you maybe... Yes, go ahead.
So is this like create React app?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so as you can see, you're already registering a component. It's pointing at the app.js. So it is, in fact, it's very similar.
Just a boilerplate, essentially.
Exactly.
Cool.
And the iOS and the Android portion of the project are both pointing at index.js. So whatever index.js is pointing to will be displayed on the home screen. So typically, you're going to want to install a router so you can point to a bunch of different components. However, today's purposes, since we're just doing a login, and I'm just going to show that we are in fact authenticated, there's no router in place. I'm going to probably add that to the next one as well. So index.js is pointing at the app.js file, import app from app. And if you look at the app.js, forgive me if this is a little too small. I'm not sure if I can zoom in. No, I cannot. It's a little small, but you're going to see this is what's in app.js. And immediately, if you type in React Native run iOS, you can get the simulator to pop up. So this middle one is the simulator actually loading. It's going to take some time because it's the first time that it's being run for this application. And the one on the right is what the home screen is going to be as soon as the page does pop up. It's going to say, welcome to React Native. To get started, edit app.js, which it says right here, just in plain text. And then we have this variable instructions. So over there we see press Command R to reload or press Command D for the dev menu. This is very specific to the iOS simulator. And as you can see up here, we're looking at either iOS or Android. So this is one of the tools that React Native allows us to have access to right off the bat. We can tell if we're talking to an Android or an iOS device. So if you want to render specific components, or if you want to take them down, give them a very specific user experience based on the device they're using, you just have to pull in platform from React Native. So you import platform from React Native, and in platform, you can select iOS or Android. You can tell it what to render based on that. So those of you that are familiar with React will see we have import React component from React, but we also have this import from React Native statement. So it may be a little confusing there. Basically, React knows how components should behave. Think of React as the controller, and think of React Native as the view. So the React is really the logic for how the application should function, but the React Native is going to give you access to your view tags, your images, whatever it is you need, and it's going to provide the default components essentially that will work on a mobile device. And then here, I'm just going to make some quick changes. It goes kind of quickly, but essentially I am changing the app.js to give us a login screen. So right now we have welcome to React Native, and I'm going to change it to have a few text box and a login button. Now I know that goes kind of quickly, however I do have all the code on GitHub as well. Essentially I'm just importing alert, button, text input, view, and style sheet from React Native. And I am creating 2 text input boxes with password and email or username inside and a login button. So already within less than 10 minutes we have an app started up, we've edited the first home page, and we have a login screen. So we're done, right? Not really. Yeah.
So all the stuff that we do in, I want to say modern React, aka React from the last month and a half.
Right.
For example, now it's pretty common to just completely circumvent the constructor and call super props and all that, and just define state as an object and
Sure.
run from there. Is that something? Are all those things that are sort of moving fast in React also applicable to React Native? Are these 2 platforms being sort of developed in parallel?
I wouldn't say they're being developed in parallel. I would say there's a lot of overlap. So if you bring in a React, or if you bring in a Redux, if you create a Redux application in this, you're not going to need to necessarily do the super props. You're going to be able to handle your state the way you would with a normal Redux application. Yeah. But I wouldn't say that React Native is updating at the same speed that React is. I think right now React still has a bigger community than React Native. It's still niche. I don't know if I agree with that word, but it's not as big as React.js. So it's not developing at the same rate.
Okay, but it's kind of like, whenever you have a React features in React Native, then whatever the features that they are updating in React.js is able to do the same in the same way in the React Native as well. Like as you go, like earlier we have a component will mount. Okay, now it is being replaced with the construct. Yeah. So that's not a React Native, that's a React.js. So you can implement those in React Native, the
right.
constructor way. You can use the depreciated component will mount. Those features also can use it, right? But
and we will be using
as
that.
you said, like the features which are developing in React.js, those features you can use it in React Native, but React Native is not developing as
It's not catching.
Right.
Right. Both
Okay.
will happen parallelly.
Eventually, essentially. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like dragging it along, but it's still
Yes.
behind it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we're not done yet. So this is where Firebase comes in. We could handle authentication a lot of different ways. We can handle it ourselves, which is kind of a cardinal sin. We can use passport.js, which a lot of us front-end developers have battled with in the past. At least I have. And again, it's not my favorite thing to do, so I'd rather use Firebase. In this case, just authentication, but they have a lot of features. First of all, what is Firebase? But very simply, it's backend as a service. You have access to, well, before I get into that, from their own site, Firebase frees developers to focus, crafting fantastic user experiences. You don't need to manage servers. You don't need to write APIs. Firebase is your server, your API, and your data store, all written so generically that you can modify it to suit most needs. So, yep.
I haven't used Firebase before, but correct me if I'm wrong. All the simplicity that Firebase gives you, it's at the cost of having less control over the data, right?
How so?
For example, like so Firebase belongs to Google, right?
Right, correct.
So like all the data that is saved in Firebase, also Google has access to it, right?
No,
No.
they won't.
That's like saying AWS has access to what you put in your S3 buckets.
Okay.
I mean, I guess technically they could, but
if they want,
yeah.
if they want to do intentionally, then they can do it. But as of the government,
Like that, anywhere you host anything, they're going to
Yeah.
somehow have
That's
if
always
they're
a bad
dedicated to breaking the rules, they can
is
get in.
breaking the rules.
Yeah. So Firebase, what does it do? You have a database, you have a file store if you want to store images, videos. You can handle authentication, hosting, cloud functions. For those of you that are familiar with AWS, cloud functions are like lambdas. They're one-off applications that are going to listen to trigger events, and then they're going to execute, either updating your database, or you can actually do some server-side rendering based off of that. You have analytics, crash analytics, cloud notifications, and a whole lot more. But, why don't I stop talking about it? Why don't I actually show you guys? So I'm going to set up a Firebase project right now and show you exactly what you need to do before you can add this to your React Native application. So let's go to firebase.com. Now you want to log into Firebase. You need to have some type of Google account. I imagine all of you have a Gmail account. So once you're logged in, you can go to console. And you're going to come to a screen that looks more or less like this. I already have a few projects in place. If you don't have any projects, there should just be a button over here that says Add Project. But for the sake of this, we're going to add a new project. And here I'm just going to call it RNFB Demo. It'll generate an automatic project ID with a unique identifier at the end. You click I accept, and you create the project. Now already you have a React Native you have a Firebase project. It'll take about 10 seconds to initialize. Press continue, and now you come to here. So now just a very quick overview. In Firebase, you have analytics, authentication, database, storage, hosting, cloud functions. I can go on and on, test lab notifications, quite a few different things. So this really helps you get up and running fast, especially if you're a front-end developer. And you have maybe limited experience in back-end development. This can really take care of most of that very quickly. So I want to test you guys. We're building a React Native application that's available on iOS and Android. If you had to choose based on these three options, what type of project do you think this would be?
Like that.
Like that?
You can only choose one.
Yeah, that was just.
If you think it's all of that, what do you think?
If we want to have for both platforms, we would have to take both the Firebase for iOS and Firebase for Android. Because the app that we're building is not a web app.
Right. So both good points. Basically what we're looking at here, this says iOS app is releasing a Swift or Objective-C app. An Android app is releasing a Java app. And a web app is releasing a JavaScript app. So it's probably not the best wording, but for a React Native application, you want to do a web app. Yeah. Now, we don't need to click on this right now, but I'm just going to show you what comes up. If you do that, you get this initialization script. And this is assuming that you're building for a proper web application on a browser. For the React Native application, the only part of this that you really care about is this right here. But we're going to ignore that for now. So I'm just going to X this out. Now let's set up authentication. If you go over here to the left, you're going to see this authentication button. And you're going to press set up sign-in method. So now you see you have a few different options. For this one, I don't want to get into the different APIs and stuff that are needed. We're just going to do email and password. You can also do phone number if you want to authenticate someone that way. I think Twitter does that to some degree. They also have their own. We're going to click email and password, and we're just going to set it up, enable. We're not going to do passwordless sign-in right now. Save. So now, just like that, email and password is enabled. You're going to see this right up here, web setup on the top right. You click on that, you get the exact same snippet again. So copy this, everything inside of here. Copy this, and I've already added this to the application, so when I go back, you're going to see a slightly different API key, but it is essentially the same thing. I'm going to copy this, and then you go back here, and we're going to go back to app.js. In app.js, you want to import Firebase from Firebase, and you want to now bring in that API key. You want this API key to be initialized, or you want that snippet to be initialized before the application actually renders. So you want to put that in the app.js, which is your highest level component. And you're going to put that in a component will mount function, so it's going to run right before the actual component renders. So let's see that. So you're going to do firebase.initialize app. Initialize app is camel cased.
So would putting it in the app component be kind of standard practice?
Yes. Yep. And then usually you put the router in the app component, and from there it'll just go down to all the routers.
Would you ever have a lower level component that would have its own Firebase access, or would you always do it? Would there be a situation where you'd want to do that?
I haven't personally come across one, but I can't imagine that wouldn't be a thing. I
mean, I can envision some dialogue that, like, okay, you know,
Yeah.
now you're doing this thing and you need access to this.
Yeah, if you want to separate it from everything else, I'm sure there is a use case, and yeah, I believe that would be possible. You could bring it into a lower level component, and it'll only be available there. Okay, so now just like that, this app initializes Firebase. As soon as this application opens, it's going to call this, and it's going to make a connection between your React Native application and Firebase. So between the last screen and this screen, I did a little bit of cleanup. I didn't include a slide, but I took all of the logic on the app.js as far as the rendered logic, so the render and the functions that are being called inside this logic, and I moved them to their own components. So I created a login form component, and I just pasted this in. I didn't change anything. I just took it out of the app.js and I pasted it in here, and I added a register button. But right now, this isn't doing anything. If I press register, it's going to just alert us whatever we typed into the email and password. If I type login, it's going to just alert us whatever we typed into the email and password. It's not doing anything yet. So in the login component, again, I'm going to import Firebase from Firebase. Any component you're going to use Firebase in, you need to import Firebase again. I think that's the thing with React. It likes to create these little buckets, and if you're importing it even at a higher level, you have to import it again in the specific component. So we're going to import Firebase from Firebase, and then in the on register, so when I click the register button, we're going to run firebase.auth, create user with email and password. We're going to pass it the email and password. So that long name, create user with email and password, is all camel cased, and it returns a promise. So we're going to create a then catch scenario. So we'll do then, and we'll take what's returned. We're going to call it user, and we're going to say once we get that returned, we're going to say this.setState, and we're going to create a message. We're going to say user has been registered. Then we're going to create a catch. So in case there's an error, something goes wrong, we either typed in an email address that wasn't in the proper format, or we typed in a password that was too short. So then it'll catch. I'm going to say this.set state. I'm going to send an error message to unable to register user. Just like that, we now have the ability to register a user. So you may have noticed we have this message and this error in the set state, but we never actually initialized them up here. So we're going to add them. We're going to add a message and an error. And then down here in the actual JSX, we're just going to create a view component, which is like a div for those of you familiar with React. And we're going to just put the messages in. Sorry, it's at the bottom. It'll scroll up in a second. Maybe not too much. But now whenever there's a message or an error, it's going to show up. So there's an issue with this. Does anyone know what it is? I'll give you a clue. It's right here. It's right here. What's the issue? So basically, yeah, I know. Sorry about that. It only captures 30-second GIFs. So essentially what's happening, we're setting a message and we're setting an error message. And we're saying when you have that, display it down here.
You're passing in two components, basically.
Kind of. So we're setting the state. Let's say we type in an email address. Let's say I say user@gmail and I forget .com and then I type in a password. That's going to hit that catch scenario, and it's going to set an error message saying user cannot be registered. Now let's say I missed .com. I type in .com and I register. Now I updated the message in set state to have a message, but I never deleted the error. So it's going to now display the error and the message. So it's something I caught after I made this slide. It won't be in the actual simulator, but that's just something to know. So you want to make sure to clear out the other message when you do that. And then right here, I'm going to give you guys an example. So I'm going to type in user. I'm going to type it in wrong, press register. It says unable to register at the bottom. If I say gmail.com, I'm going to type in a password. I'm going to register. And I forgot to parse the object, but it's going to say registered at the bottom. And if we refresh this page, you're going to see it now in the Google Authentication up at the top. You'll see it user@gmail.com. So this user is now registered. It exists within Firebase. It's that simple. Now typically Firebase, when you register, it automatically logs you in. For our purposes, I didn't display that. I felt that it's irrelevant. But with your own applications, when you register, it should automatically log you in, and you should be able to just take that route and send them to the home screen. So now we're going to do the same thing for login. So let's say this user is already registered. We're going to copy this, paste it in login, and we just change a couple things. Instead of create user with email and password, we're going to say sign in with email and password. And we're going to change the message from registered to logged in, and unable to register is going to say unable to log in. Just like that, we now have login authentication. So let's run it. I'm going to create an email, and I'm going to try and log in, but this is an email that hasn't been registered yet. I'm going to try log in, unable to log in. So let's register it. All right, it's been registered. Now let's log in. And it's been logged in. So in, I would say, exactly 30, yeah, go ahead.
So question, right now it's just doing a simple check.
Yeah.
Right? Is there any sort of response you get from Firebase that says, instead of unable to log in, which would be the error, user already exists.
You get the user object. So as you can see here, I never parsed it, but it's going to say when I press register, it's going to say object registered. That's essentially the user object. So you're going to have all the user information in there.
Okay, so if I try to log in and the password is wrong,
Sure.
do you get a different kind of response as when you try to log in and the user doesn't exist?
If the user doesn't exist, no, you're not. It's just going to it's going to hit that catch statement.
Okay.
Yeah. But no, that's a great question.
You can check before if the email already exists.
Yeah, I mean you can run you can run a function first. Does this email exist, and do that.
I have a question.
Sure.
So how is it handling Firebase? Is it a REST call, an AJAX call that it's doing, or
Yeah, so Firebase has its own set of APIs, and that's a great thing about having it as a dependency in your React Native application. Firebase has here. Let's go in right here. So it's a really great library you can pull in, and you have a bunch of different API calls you can make. So this one, Firebase.auth, will just if you're already logged in, you run Firebase.auth, it's going to return to you whether or not this user is logged in. It'll remember your device, because it sends a little token that gets stored in your device automatically. You don't even have to do any of the coding; it's already there, and it's going to then return an object, the entire user's information, and you're going to have a UID with that. So with any future calls you make to Firebase, let's say you want to get something specific from the database or from storage or anywhere else for that specific user, you just take that UID token, you store it in your if you're running a Redux application or anything else, you can store it in state. You can do whatever you want with it, and then you take that and you run against that UID token, and it's going to then return the specific user's information.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
What is this create user with email and password? Is a keyword from Firebase?
Yes.
Or you can create,
No, this is a Firebase function. Yeah. So Firebase, the function names are kind of long, but they're also very explicit. There's no guessing what that does. You know what that does. And also Firebase has fantastic documentation. I would say like it's up there with anyone else. It's definitely the best. Everything is laid out for you. There's video tutorials for everything as well as giant documents. And there's blog posts, everything. They have fantastic documentation. I couldn't recommend it enough. Okay. So there you go. In 30 minutes, we created a React Native environment. We initialized a React Native application. We spun up a React Native simulator. We edited that to have a login form. We created a Firebase account. We created a new project. We added authentication, and then we took the authentication and we ran it in our application, all in under 30 minutes. So as you can see, setting up React Native with a Firebase application is very simple. In fact, they are built to go hand in hand. Almost any tutorial you can find on Firebase talks about React Native. They're built to go hand in hand so the developer can just get up and running immediately. And that's it for part 1 of the application. If you guys want, I do have this full application up on github.com, Karen631, or in Firebase. And I'm going to post a link as well. I'm going to put the video for this up on YouTube. I'm going to post a link in the Meetup if you guys are interested.
Awesome.
Any questions?
Future classes, they will have get dogs once they do the hands-on.
What's that?
Once they do hands-on, then everyone will get dogs.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I know I went a little fast.
Yeah.
I did go a little fast, absolutely. But, feel free to go into my GitHub, look at the actual code, review this, and I think it's going to make a lot more sense. I didn't want this to go too long. I didn't want to lose anyone's attention, so I thought 30 minutes would really be where I wanted to cap that at.
Well, live coding that would have been pretty staggeringly difficult.
Yeah.
You learn how hard live coding is once you go up there and do it.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
like-
Oh, no, I've done it before. I know. I don't want to do it ever again.
I mean, but to do something like this to actually
You can
interface with
do it like
Firebase.
online.
Yeah.
Like,
In online,
Maybe ever
not,
possible
not
will
really
happen,
Oh, yeah. You want to type faster to get through, and then you create issues. But yeah, so
But what would be some of the kind of alternatives you might consider to using Firebase?
alternatives to Firebase, honestly, I'm not too familiar with many of them. I've built my own. You say .NET?
No,
do you-
that was like, before.
We use AWS most of the services, but it's less.
Right,
The
so-
developer experience is less nice than Firebase.
Right. I mean, like
I
that.
mean, AWS is a monster. Like it's so bewildering to go in and pick what you actually need.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's fine once you know. That, okay, yeah, this is what I need.
If you want to do all the work, there's a ton of options. If you don't want to do any of the work, I think that Firebase is one of the best products out there.
If you're concentrating on React Native, letting about React Native, just don't bother about the backend.
Exactly.
Like Firebase gives you everything what you need.
Right, yeah.
So
Firebase
like,
holds
your
your
whole
hand.
concentration will be on the React Native instead of building a server side. So
Exactly.
you'll cover more concepts in React Native instead of covering more concepts in other areas.
Right.
That's right.
And it's not just React Native. You can build any web application. You can build an iOS or an Android application in native code, and you can hook it right up to Firebase. The exact same APIs. It's going to work without any problems.
If Firebase is great.
Yeah.
Good question. Where does the simulator run? Is it just Chrome?
No. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So you need Xcode. This is actually part of Xcode.
I don't have an answer to that.
Oh.
So Xcode has its own set of emulators for iPhone, and it also has emulators for each version of iOS. So I mean, you can pick and choose. I'm pretty sure with Android, same thing. You download Android Studio, and it
Right.
shows you all the emulators.
It's got the tablets and Mac TV.
Okay.
Yeah, you can. I can spin this up on an iPad, and I can plug in my own phone and have it running on my own phone. And in fact, I have applications running on my own phone that I've created.
That's cool.
Yeah, and they're not launched. They're not on the App Store anywhere, but you can just plug in your phone, and you'll just load it right up.
You could have other tools also like Expo XD.
So Expo is not going to work if you initialize a React Native application this way. We found that out the hard way.
This way, like, just other ways. There are other ways, like you don't need to do anything. You install one Expo server side app and then Expo client side app. You don't need to do anything. Just do one. When you have internet, automatically whatever is testing on screen, you can test the same on the code without installing the app.
Right.
Right.
Expo is kind of cool too. I discovered Expo. Actually, Dan showed me Expo after I got started with my current React Native project.
Yeah, that's cool actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, Expo has some issues where there's some limitations where you cannot run background tasks, and it sounds kind of stupid.
It's an important thing, unfortunately.
Whenever you
Okay.
when you are in learning phase or like sleeping forms and all those, then as you say like you get feeling like you're being in hand.
Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
You showed us what the authentication looks like for Firebase. Do you just have a quick example of, say, some component interacting with Firebase objects that you could show us?
Some component. Let's see what.
Just like a typical like use case for pulling something.
Yeah. Let me pull up something for you guys. Oops. It's bitbucket.org. Okay. Oops. Let's go to this one. So this is a React Native with Redux application. I don't know if you guys were looking at the file structure. That's why it looked a little different. Let's see here.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so right here. So now I'm trying to add an object to the Firebase database with all of these different items. So I'm saying let me zoom in, this a little small. Okay. Is that big enough for you guys?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're saying Firebase.database before we're doing Firebase.auth to talk to authentication, Firebase.database to talk to the database. It's pretty simple. Firebase.database, and then we give it a reference. So my database path is going to be users. Then I'm going to take current user.uid. Again, that's what I got from the authentication. I got my personal UID, so now it knows only do this for this user's object in the database, along menu items, and then I'm going to push this menu item in, essentially. So it's really that simple. You just give it Firebase.database, you give it a reference path, and you push in what you're trying to push in. And it's going to create an object there for you. And that object's going to then get a unique identifier as well. And then again, it returns a promise, so you could say then, and you can navigate somewhere else, or you could do whatever you want with
so
that.
Almost every push would have user/UID because it would be unless
Exactly.
it's something not like at the application level that needed to change.
Right. And I think something that's a good practice, if you're trying to, let's say whenever the user does something, you want to store to some other database or some other object in the database that's not user specific.
Yeah.
You can do that, And you can do that from here. But I would suggest at that point you want to use a Google Cloud function so that instead of pushing somewhere, you can push to your own database, and that Cloud function is going to listen to that. So you can say to a Google Cloud function, listen to every single user. Whenever the file path that ends with menu items gets a new object, trigger this. Save that same object to this other location.
So for like this, it would be someone made a new menu item. Maybe let's make it available to all users that they chose to do so, something like that.
Exactly.
But yeah, that's like.
And that's exactly what's happening.
Do it on the back end, right?
Yeah.
Rather than bouncing up to the front end.
Exactly. You want to take as much logic off the front end as possible. So in fact, let me show you guys what the Cloud function looks like. So we have a functions folder. I'm going to go into Cloud Functions, and let's just say save to live menu. So now I'm going to say whenever something is looking at the Firebase or functions database, and now it's going to say, okay, whenever some item came in along this file path for the users, whatever the user ID is, in the menu items, the exact same file path we were just looking at, take this object. So whatever the last item is, it's what it's going to look at. So say whenever this gets updated, this is going to run because I set a onCreate trigger. So whenever we add a new item under this path, this is going to run. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to save it to a live menu items reference in the database. So now this is not user specific anymore. This goes to everyone on the feed. And then this is JavaScript, so it's like a Node backend almost. You can write in little one-off functions that just trigger when one thing happens.
So it's going both places in this case. Right?
In this case, yeah. So as a user, it's going to save to my own. I'm going to save an object that says, I have this menu item live. But now as a customer, I also have a customer. Any other customer is going to have a live feed of, well, what menu items are live, and they're all going to be saved into this portion of the database. Yeah.
It's kind of like the role of this code is like pushing a notification.
Sorry?
The role of this code is like pushing a notification.
Yeah, exactly. So this specifically is not a push notification.
No, event triggering kind of.
Yeah, it's an event trigger, exactly. And you can trigger a push notification from here. I wish it were very simple. iOS requires, and that's one of the things I'm working on right now, iOS requires certain certifications, and you need an Apple developer account again to have push notifications and all of that because it's a way of handling security with the certifications.
Don't you need one anyway to publish?
Yes, if you want it, but even before you publish, you need
just
it.
for sandboxing purposes?
Exactly, you still need it. And it expires every year and you have to get another one. And the certifications are fun. Maybe I'll do one on that as well.
I know from my Xcode days how bad it is.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a nightmare.
Where do you do these?
You have to go to the Apple developers. You have to go to apple.developer.com or something like that. If you just Google Apple Developer account, it's going to open up. You log in if you have one. You could also create a developer account in Xcode. Just do it through the website. Anything you can do to get out of Xcode, get out of Xcode.
Designating your developer account, the team you're associated with, getting the certificate and associating that with your project, it's bad.
Yeah, it's a pain in the ass, but it's also a reason Apple devices are far more secure than Android devices.
And it's the only way.
Yeah, it's the only way.
Okay.
It's the only way. You don't have the option.
Right. Okay.
And this isn't React Native. This is anything that has to do with iOS has to go through this process. Yep. Yeah, so this is what a Cloud function would look like. Hello. This is what a Cloud function would look like essentially. And in the next meetup, we can actually go through and I'll set up Cloud functions, I'll set up Redux, and I'll set up the database. So you can actually see what we just showed you. Anyone else?
How does it work if I wanna export my data from Firebase?
If you want to export it. So
Yeah.
I've actually been reading up on this recently. Originally, there was no way to export it unless you talked. You had to call them up and they would help you do it. They'd send you something and you could do it from there. But I have been reading that they are adding something in or have recently added something in that allows you to export it. They've added that feature in. I haven't actually personally done it because all my data right now is dummy data that I'm just creating as I build this application. But I can look into that. I can get back to you. But I believe that there is now some button you press and it's going to export for you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys.